Hey folks, Dr. Emily here, and I am super excited. Will AI replace the tech workforce? And so we have today with us an AI researcher, Keith Trnka, who's going to tell us all about it as well and join us in that conversation. So Keith has so much experience, but I don't want to steal his thunder. I'll let him tell it. He just has so much experience in this field. Thanks for coming, Keith.
Thanks for having me. Hi, I'm Keith Trnka. I've been in some form of machine learning for about 20 years, about 13 in industry and about 8 in academia. I've been in kind of a range of different things, mostly focusing on text like NLP. I did my PhD in language modeling, which has now become the hot topic all over the industry. And I've done a lot of different kinds of machine learning, done a lot of different kinds of applications, whether consumer tech or healthcare or gaming, been individual contributor. I've also been in leadership roles as well, a leadership role as well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, I know this is a hot topic lately, and in part because the cloud CEO for Amazon recently said, for Amazon Web Services, had in a leaked recording. So this wasn't supposed to go public, but it did. He claimed that AI is replacing all the software developers in 2 years. Now he also said he's not sure how long, but that was kind of the sensational headline that everyone's talking about. This was released last week, and so I think that it brings up this burning question is, will AI replace the tech workforce, right? And so I'm just curious, you understand so well the limits of AI as well as its strengths. So how do you weigh in terms of the future of the tech workforce in a world with AI?
So look, no one knows the future for certain. We're all taking our best guess at it based off of our background, our expertise. I think probably not. I think probably AI isn't coming for programming jobs, at least anytime soon. I could be, of course, completely wrong. I didn't anticipate ChatGPT before it happened. I sort of saw where the field was going, but I had no idea the impact that it was going to have. So just when you're talking about the future, it's important to have humility in your own ability to predict the future. The other thing about the Amazon CEO quote is that I think it's interesting to look at the context in which he said it. So I believe part of what he was saying was that he saw a bit of programming being replaced by AI, and we can debate whether that's likely to happen or not. But the context of what he was saying was that he was expecting software engineers to shift their skill sets into product development, into making products that help people better, and focus their energy at these higher leverage points in product development. And so I think he gets quoted as, hey, AI is coming for your jobs, but actually he was trying to say that AI is a part of this story of people leveling up and to have more impact on businesses than they did before. Whether that'll happen or not, we can get into that, but I think there's a lot to the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I know if you read the quotes that came out, they're very sensationalized. Like, oh my goodness, he said developers are being replaced by AI in 2 years. And the quote out of context does look a lot like that. But if you read the whole thing, right, obviously, he was talking about how the job is going to change and evolve, right? Like it's not just about I think the real question moving forward is AI is here to stay. Just as when Google hit the market and search hit the market, they were here to stay as tools supporting the software development process. I think the real question is, what are those skills that continue? What is the job of a developer in the age of AI? Do we still need to learn the basics of coding? Do we need to learn to write code? Yes, we do, but we can go into that. but what does it mean in terms of the day-to-day of the software developer? And I agree with you. I think it's evolving the software developer's role in the process. Basically, every software developer now has this little code supporter. So it's almost like every software developer has just become an expert project manager. Keith, would you agree with that assessment?
I would say well, getting into the product side of things, there's a lot of different types of roles, and I would say that AI, if you're just using ChatGPT without a whole lot of experience, you're not going to replace like a good product manager. Project management involves a lot more of like managing schedules, and so that's a lot of things that actually current generation ChatGPT can't do because it's not hooking into Jira or any of these things. And so it might, with expertise, help you take some of that burden. But it's really helping you get from, you know, a beginner to like slightly better than a beginner in these fields.
Right.
So
exactly.
And that's how it is in fields where you don't have experience, I would say. In a field where you do have experience, it has kind of different roles.
Right, exactly. I love that. And I think the hesitation I'm seeing in the marketplace a little bit is, you know, there's AI coming out and there's these massive tech layoffs. And so they're combining, I think what I'm hearing from people is they're hesitant. They're like, well, I don't know what career is right for me. And they're also hesitating, is this as valuable a career path as it used to be? Now, Keith and I graduated back in the day in the early 2000s, and the same thing was happening. So we've been around the block a while. Like, I remember we graduated college, dare I share it, 2003 or 2002, 2003 timeframe, right? But, you know, it was the dot-com bust, the bubble burst, and everyone was laid off. Oh, tech is over. Do you know how many booms and busts we've had since? It's just cyclical. But the developers are always really well placed to earn top dollar. Like these skills are in such high demand. And ChatGPT and AI aren't going to change that. In part, just think of it for a second. Like, you know, Keith, you had mentioned humility and the humility of knowing and acknowledging where we are. And, you know, lawyers in New York City used ChatGPT to write their briefs, and the AI cited in like court cases that did not exist. So AI is great, but you have to know enough to know if the AI is right. And as humans, we have to do that due diligence and have the humility to recognize the limits of where we currently are. Like, will AI replace, you know, development as we know it? Maybe in like 20 years, but I don't think it's gonna be that soon. I think there's just so much more we have to learn. And I was curious, Keith, if you could speak at all to like what AI does really well right now and what aspects of the software development process, you've already touched on it, like scheduling with people, it doesn't do that well, right? Like, what are the things that it really has limits? It's going to take us years as humans to get it to that level, to be actually replacing the humans in the loop.
Yeah, and I love to talk about like where I've seen it succeed and how it's been useful, because that helps us get some grounding into, you know, instead of just wild speculation, we can look at where it's succeeded well, where it's flopped, and then we can start to extrapolate a little bit to what's the next generation going to be like. So some of the examples that are close to software engineering where it's worked well, I'll say it's great at very like boilerplate heavy API call type work where, you know, you can't remember for the life of you, did they call it, you know, query or request, or did they capitalize it in some funny way? And you're trying to search for the thing, but their web page is loading slow and you're just like frustrated out of your mind. Like, it is great for dealing with that kind of thing.
That sounds like you're speaking from experience, Keith.
Look, a little bit. Yeah. So it's very like rote type of work where if you have the time, you go to the API documentation webpage, you look at it, you read it all. Hopefully it's correct. And then you do
that's a whole other thing.
Right.
Maybe the documentation is correct, maybe it's not. Yeah. And that's what ChatGPT is also relying on, but I digress.
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges there, especially with APIs that change over time. That can be a real problem where it might generate code for an older version. That can be all kind of, but it helps you a lot with that sort of rote stuff. You also have patterns in code that are really common, and it helps you, you know, reproduce those patterns. So I'll give you an example of doing network API calls from within Unreal's customized version of C++. In Python, it might be one line to request an API call, and on Unreal, it might be like 20 or 30. And it's a lot of very subtle modification of the thing. So just to give you kind of an example of like helping with those kinds of things.
Yeah, so it's going to help you cut down on your development time. And to be honest, a year ago we had Coach Chad was another coach in the Joy of Coding Academy program, and he was a 30-year veteran coder as well. So he's been coding since the internet was born. And when he uses ChatGPT, he takes something like a beginner, it would take them like a month or two to build, and he can use ChatGPT to create it in a weekend. But he is bringing that value, right? Like he is adding that. And so I think, like, in terms of cutting down, like the figuring out how all the bits and pieces, fit together, it's almost like a locksmith tool, right? That can like kind of just help fast track creating that key for you that unlocks what you're doing, but it doesn't actually, you still have to physically turn the lock, right? You have to turn the doorknob, but you have to put the pieces together.
Right,
so it can fast track it, but it's not going to replace the human. It's going to augment the human.
No, it's certainly not. I would say that the way that I think about it is as translation. So like there's actually a rich success of machine learning in machine translation. It's not perfect, of course, but that gives you some context for code generation, which a lot of the code work is translating from something that's like pseudocode or a test or an expectation, something very human and easy to reason about, into precise code. And so you still have to know what you're trying to accomplish. You still have to know what the input and output should be. A common pattern that works really well is to like write your documentation, write your function signature and the comments, and that's usually enough to figure out how a small piece could be implemented. Now we can go into all this. This is kind of like one category, the code generation category. It's great for like boilerplate type stuff that's like typically involves sometimes a bit of copy paste type work and editing. There's an interesting discussion of like, should that just be a library that doesn't require copy paste? There's some interesting stuff there. Sometimes it's useful for critique. So you might have a system architecture in mind, and you want to get feedback on it, but you don't have anyone to talk to at that particular moment in time. Getting some sort of feedback on it, it's getting you perspective. You're still the driver, but it's helping to broaden your perspective to get you out of your own head a little bit. It's usually better to talk to someone, but that's not always an option depending on who you know or the time of day. Another area I'll say that it's quite useful is, again, with this sort of translation concept, is when you say how to do something in one programming language, but you don't know how to do it in another programming languages. Basically, all programming languages have the same core stuff in them. They have little differences, but you might just not know what it's called.
Yep, for sure.
And there may not be a page that's like, okay, what's the Rust equivalent of this Python thing, right? There might not be pages for every single pair of programming languages and every single topic that you need to convert between them. But you have to learn a lot of different programming languages in industry. And so it really helps with that, that beginner stuff. Now, as you said, you always got to check the output. You always got to, run it by people, review it, make sure it works. It can help you with the testing of it, but you have to be extra diligent in validating that your tests are testing what you think. So these are all sort of things in the programming space, and then we can, depending on where you want to go, we can go into like the broader software development space because there's a lot of interesting stuff there too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, to bring it back to like, we have a mixed audience, watching that. Some folks have experience in IT and tech. Some people have gone through a coding boot camp or degree, and some people may just be trying to figure out, is a tech career right for me? And I think especially for those folks, on the outside who haven't seen it, like I think when people with experience that have gotten past the basics, right? When you've started to build actual applications and you start to learn what's gone into them and creating them, it's not even a distraction to you when the Amazon Cloud CEO says that they're being replaced in 2 years, because it's like, we all know that no, that is not, like, with confidence, that's not what's happening. Is the role going to evolve? Absolutely. And so I guess that would be, in terms of someone just getting started potentially on this career path and wondering if this is viable. I mean, we've been through these ups and downs, you and I, Keith, multiple times. There was the boom of 2005 and 2000s, right? There's always ups and downs, right? What advice can we give to somebody just getting started in terms of what kinds of skills should they be focusing on so that, the skills that they're learning are not going to just be cannibalized by AI in the next 2 years, right? If they're trying to start a career in this.
So that's a good question. I would say that there aren't a whole lot of skills that will be cannibalized by AI in the next few years. You still have to be in the driver's seat, and you're going to have to be for quite a long time, I think. So it's kind of even hard to say.
I have some ideas if you want.
Oh yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, and just to kind of pull on that idea of like the driver's seat to make that full circle, like what do we mean by being in the driver's seat, right? Like you can drive a car without knowing how internal combustion works, but you are in the driver's seat. You are spinning the steering wheel. You're putting the foot on the gas. You're directing where the car goes, right? The car just sits there if you don't tell it where to go. And to be honest, ChatGPT is like that car. It will not go until you tell it where to go. So, the tech workers of the future have to be able to articulate clearly what it is they want, right? So that ChatGPT can deliver it. But here's the reason why it's not replacing the human. Someone has to know that it worked. Right? Like someone has to actually, and this is what we spend a lot of time on the AI internship, right? Our coding tutor internship is like knowing what good looks like. Is it right? Did it give us what we wanted? Because the possibilities of what it could create are potentially limitless. And so it's going to give us one possible outcome out of this almost infinite set. And we have to say yes or no. And if it's no, this isn't what I wanted, ChatGPT, we have to know enough to refine the query to define what it is we actually do truly want. And so that is one of the most challenging aspects of software development, is actually being able to articulate what you want. So just in terms of that driver's seat piece, would you agree with that, Keith? Anything else you'd like to add to that analogy?
Yeah, I would say, when you're in industry roles, you're dealing with big, complicated projects, and you're not given very specific directions like a homework assignment. So you might be given direction like save doctors time. You have to go figure out which doctors, what are they doing, what are they using their time on, and then you have to understand them well enough to understand what kinds of things might help. And then you have to figure out how to build what's technically viable. And then you have to figure out what's compatible with those doctors. Like and that's even like before you can really commit to a software architecture. Like we're not even getting into like that stuff. And even if you have answers to all those questions and you have a sense of where the value is, how you break down a problem is very specific to the context of the company that you're working in, the users that you're working in, the regulatory environment. And writing down that context is something that doesn't happen. Like no one fully writes it down. So in theory, if you could write a 100-page spec on what the next week of software development would be like, maybe you could hand that to an AI, except that writing that down would take you longer than a week.
And longer than just writing the code. At that point, right?
Well, I will say, actually, it depends on level of seniority, right? So if you take someone that's new to the field and you give someone a big problem, that's overwhelming, right? There's too many possibilities. When you have experience, you start to see patterns. Okay, here's how we want to break it down. This part over here, we need to be really careful about, because I think that someone asked for one thing, but they're definitely going to ask me for this other thing in like 5 weeks if it works. Like the AI is not really good at like that. They said one thing, but they're definitely going to change their mind. And so I need to make that code so that it supports the future use case to a degree. If it's, it's not going to cost you too much. So there's a lot of complexity in building software that it's just not there yet. It's great for these kind of like lower level tasks where you might say, okay, I got to make some API call to do something, or I need to separate some numbers in a certain way. It's very, very simple things like writing a function, writing a class for one particular thing. But you in the driver's seat have to decide that that is the function that needs to be written in the context of your larger program, in the context of the business problem you're working on. right? And so
Right.
so much of that
Exactly.
context, it's in your head, right? If you wrote it down, it would be enormous. And for better or worse in industry, it's usually 2% of it's written down.
It all lives up here.
Yeah, and that's where things get kind of hard in industry too, is when different people have different contexts, sometimes in disagreement.
Yes, exactly. So just, this is amazing, Keith. Thank you so much. That was like the cherry on top. And just to bring it back for anyone who's like a true beginner and maybe hasn't thought about these things before, one of the challenges when you're on a production level software project, so when you actually are that 6-figure software developer working on a team, one of the biggest challenges you face is anticipating change, predicting the future. Again, like the future is coming back a lot today. And the reason is because you can't actually build software to anticipate every possible change that there might exist. You would actually literally never create the software. So you have to make choices and define and decisions about, okay, I assume this is not going to change. It still could, but I'm going to assume that it's not. But I am 90% sure that they are going to change their mind on this. In fact, I don't even agree with it, but the customer gets what the customer wants, right? Kind of thing. So like there's times where we're like, that's going to change. So it. And so we build out for that, because the cost of not building out for that is like a whole boatload more work. It's like imagine painting a room and you're like, I want it to be green. And then they paint it and you change your mind. No, now that I see it, I really want it blue. And that's like every feature in a software project, and repainting it is redoing it. Or you can build in a little more work up front to design it in a way that makes it easier to switch it from green to blue later. Like imagine the way this might work on a website is, imagine you had a website that was all green on every single web page, and you change the layout, right? The people know how to do this now, so this doesn't happen. But let me just give you an example where the whole scheme of the UI is all green based, and then the client says, you know what, I want it to be blue. And the person creating it was new. They didn't anticipate that change, and they have to go and change every single element on every web page for that website to be blue. Or a more senior developer or someone who's learned these design best practices is like, oh no, color should be located in one style sheet file over here, so I can change that color with just typing 5 characters, a hex code, right? Okay, now that's changed everywhere in my application. So with time and learning, right, more senior software engineers know this. And so that's, I think, what Keith is saying in terms of anticipate, that ability to anticipate change requires context. It requires knowledge of the problem that is rarely written down, and AI is not going to have it. Right? So like the human is required to articulate the bounds of what it is AI is going out and doing. They're telling it what to do, basically. Right? Awesome.
So I mean, in that example, I will say that because AI is really trained on stuff like Stack Overflow, it's going to pick up practices for that. So it may actually pick up the practice of factoring out your color so that it can be changed easily. But the reason why people pay software engineers is because we're not just rewriting the same thing every time. Each different application is quite a bit different, and so you have to be adaptable to the kinds of problems that you have, and you have to imagine what kinds of things may need to be changed in that particular application. It's not like people are being hired to write the same exact thing over and over again. I mean, to a degree, a little bit, and when people are frustrated, they'll talk about that. But everything's kind of its own unique build to a degree. And then if things are repeated, then we make libraries and then we don't write them anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So X3 Olives had an awesome comment in the chat I'd like to touch on. And then I'd love to go over the critical skills and get your opinion on the critical skills developers should have in the time of AI. But I was curious, Keith, what you thought of response in terms of model collapse and the AI models degrading over time. Do you think they're going to just keep improving, or is there some risk here that also the AI that might work one day might not work as well the
next? So there's a lot of different topics in there. So one topic is that the provider could change the model, and that's happened. For coding tasks, I haven't seen seen that be impactful. For things like LLM applications, I have seen that be impactful. And so you have to be resilient against that. In that situation for coding, I haven't seen that as much. But to the point of like, you know, the internet is being saturated with AI generated content and AI is trained on the internet, is it all gonna just collapse, right? There's actually a few different topics related to that. So one topic is, you know, is it kind of training on its own data to speak? Large companies are putting a ton of effort to prevent that from happening. And so what's happening is it's making it more costly for them to develop the next generation. Coupled with that is that things are to the point where models have trained on the majority of the internet. They got it all. Our computers are big enough, our clusters are big enough that they're training on the majority of the internet. And AI generated content is radically accelerating while, you know, human generated content is sort of following the pace of the population. And so they're facing that kind of a challenge where they're like, well, if we got 10x more data, we could make it a lot better, but there isn't 10x more data. So that's one of the challenges there. Related to this also is that now that there's so much hype and money around generative AI specifically, now there's more attention from regulation and more concerns about, oh, I didn't really sign up to have my content be regurgitated by an AI. And so you're starting to see more things that are heading in the direction, I don't know how it'll pan out, they're heading in the direction where companies building these models may have to decrease the amount of data that they're training on because some of it they may be forbidden from training on. And so all these signs aren't so much pointing to model collapse as much as making it vastly more expensive for a company like OpenAI to develop, making it slower for a company like OpenAI to make the next generation and that sort of thing. So I'm not expecting model collapse. I am expecting, you know, the pace of development to slow down a little bit.
Absolutely. It's like we got the low hanging fruit. Now as a society, we're kind of like dealing with it and working with it.
Well, a lot of the big progress that we see came from having computational methods that could make use of that scale data and also coupled with hardware improvements. And so it's kind of the simple approach in machine learning is throw more data at something to make it better. And they found something that scaled quite well with data. It is vastly less efficient than a person at learning from data. And so
always.
But the thing is, to make it more efficient per piece of data that it consumes takes a lot of research time. That's the frontier of research. And so
humans, sorry, Keith.
No, go ahead.
So, but like humans always will learn faster on less data than machines will, but there's the risk of bias. But like a human is going to generalize over 10 to 30 data points, and machine learning is going to take AI, like 100, 300,000 data points, right? Who knows? Depends on the accuracy of the model and how much thought and time and intentionality went into picking up the signals, right? What is it that the AI is basing its judgments on, right? Like if you just like throw garbage in, garbage out, right? Like you throw garbage into the AI, it's going to give you garbage AI back. It's not going to help anybody. But yeah, you were going to say something too.
Oh, I just think that, it's going to be tougher, especially it's just going to be tougher to do some of the next generation of things. If I think past, look back at the last year or two, what's the real progress been? Some companies that had less money are now able to build models that were big a year or two ago. So things have gotten cheaper. There's been a big focus on making things run faster, and that correlates with cheaper. So a lot of the effort's gone into that while kind of chipping away at making them higher quality. I'm optimistic because there's so many people researching on it that there'll be progress, but it's going to be probably a different kind of progress than just let's throw more data at it and more CPUs at it.
Right, because now AI is in the mix, and you're right. Keith, you had mentioned about privacy and how much access does AI get to all of our data, and we've already been seeing companies actually restricting the AI and not allowing AI to be used because it was actually revealing like classified information to those that didn't have that classification right. So there's privacy concerns as well. So there's so many. This is like a Pandora's box we've just opened with AI, and now society is grappling with it. Not to mention the fact that AI is now generating the information that it's learning from, right? So like it used to be a clean state pre and post AI, and so now it's kind of messy. Oh, should I be learning from only human information, or should I learn from the generative AI information, right? Like there's so many questions now. I agree with you, Keith, that I think it's going to be a little bit slower moving forward. Now, just in terms of, I'd love to switch gears for just a second. What does this mean for the person who wants, the aspiring software developer, the person who wants to have a tech career and wants to make sure that AI is not going to steal it from them as soon as they've invested in themselves and learned it? So, like, what are those skills, the critical skills for developers in the age of AI? Now, I have a couple I could propose to you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So I think, based on what we had talked about before, prompting the AI with what to do and knowing that it worked. So I think the first two key skills are reading code and recognizing code, right? Like reading what the code is doing and recognizing if it meets, what you've set out to accomplish. Would you agree that those would be valuable skills long-term in the age of AI?
Yeah, I would say also there's a bit of like technique to it as well of like you don't necessarily read all of the lines of code of a library that you use. And so you have a different way of establishing trust there, right? So it really comes down to trust, and that can involve reading the code, or it can involve other approaches. So you can take a more testing oriented approach. You can take a more third-party validation approach. There are different approaches. For these little snippets, it's going to be reading code.
Yeah. Well, because you don't want to like test everything, right? The initial read is just to be like, did this answer my prompt? Does it look reasonable? Yes or no. So there's going to be some amount of reading. And then the next step, you would go test it in your system and see, okay, right? Because you first want to know, is this worth my time? Is this worth my time to integrate it into my system and actually test it? Because it's not going to work perfectly right away. I'm going to have to debug it a little bit. I have to copy and paste it in, hook it in, change the variable names, whatever they are, right? You have to make it go. And that's going to take you minimally probably 20 minutes at least. It could be days, right? Depending on how big the snippet is.
It depends on what it is. Some things, the testing them takes a minute. It depends on what it is. And there are some things that it's safe to just run it and see, and there's other things where it's unsafe to run it and see. And so you always have to keep risk in the back of your mind. There's all different kinds of risk of spending thousands of dollars on AWS, or risks of leaking patient data. There's all kinds of risks that you want to keep in mind, but you have to balance those when you're writing things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think reading and recognizing, that was the first level of critical skill. The next one, which we've already been talking about, is debug and integrate. Because like we said before, you can't just copy and paste that code willy-nilly into your code base. It's going to give you a bunch of red error messages. You have to actually hook it up and make it go, right? And debug it if it doesn't work perfectly. Maybe your system is set up differently than what the system that AI learned from, right? So you have to like align it. So I think no matter what, that is absolutely essential skills for any developer moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, like basically all of the developer skills are still needed. I think with AI just kind of throws a twist into it, I would say. Like all your basic skills are still necessary. Like the twist that it throws into it is that maybe you're going to be able to write code, like, quote unquote write code, even if it's copy paste, quote unquote write code faster. Maybe say, the example I use is like, maybe it's 10% faster or something, right? But it's really shifting a bit of where the time goes to. You're shifting your time into more verification type things. You're shifting your time into iterating with an AI. You're shifting your time into skills around being able to prompt well. You're shifting your skills into how to quickly, in your prompt, how to quickly communicate the context of the system, these sorts of things.
Yeah, exactly.
There's all different kinds of skills. Some of the things that it adds onto the skills that you already have is recognition of when it is reliable and when it is unreliable. So I'll say from my own experience, when I'm using some technology and it's well known, say it's React or something like that, then generative AI is probably going to be fairly reliable. If I'm using something that's much more niche, say I'm doing some data analysis in pandas, it's going to be less reliable. It's still fairly good at that, but it's not going to be as reliable. Or say, at my last job, they had, a lot of our data was in Spark, and so we were using a mixture of PySpark and Spark SQL. Well, generative AI was good at generating standard SQL, but Spark SQL isn't 100% compatible. And generative AI wasn't good at the difference between the two. And so there's these things you have to kind of recognize, whether you're in a situation where it applies or whether you're not in a situation where it applies. It's a tool to help accelerate you by shifting what you're focusing on a bit, but it takes a bit of overhead, and it's going to be effective in some scenarios and completely ineffective in other scenarios.
I love that. That's such a great summary. I want to soundbite that, right? Like it's going to work sometimes, but it's not going to work all the time. And so, and I've always said this, even though software developers Google a lot, right? Like I feel like the growth in a software developer's tool set from Google to ChatGPT is a similar trajectory. And it was always the case that Google accelerated the software development process. It was a tool that developers could use faster, but it never replaced them. And you always have to know what to do if Google fails, right? That's why software developers are paid so much. It's not because they just Google all the time or ChatGPT all the time and copy and paste. It's what, like you just said, Keith, Spark SQL didn't work well for. When it doesn't work, at the end of the day, the company expects you to do it no matter what tools are working or not. So really, being a six-figure software developer, having these skills in an AI-proof world, right, in an AI-proof career, is to bring it, is to be able to own it and do it no matter what. And it might take you 2 weeks longer than if ChatGPT could do it in 20 minutes, but you're still going to have to do it because that is your job, right? So good.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of this is also so much of the focus on generative AI for code is on just producing code, but so much of the actual difficulty of being a software developer in industry is working with other people, is sort of, what is the common language that we use at this company on this team, or we may have our own unique standards because of some particular need that we have that differ from, what you see on the internet or something like that. And there are all different kinds of things that go in on that. If you just, ChatGPT generate some code and you throw it into a code review and someone says, I don't think this part here is really good with it. Like, you have to understand how you fit into the context of your team and how to make something that is the best for the company overall, not just the easiest to copy and paste off of the internet.
Yeah. So I think just to kind of like summarize that, right, what you're saying is like context matters. And this is why AI is not replacing us, basically, is because you have the context of the code itself, your team, the company, and everything we had said before about making it scalable, right? Anticipating future change. Like that all comes into that context. And I would say those are the other critical skills on my list, right? I had 3 things, right? Is the ability to anticipate how this code is going to grow and change. Like AI can't do that. Now it could if you kind of like bake it in and tell it, but to be honest, if you have to sit down and write 10 pages to describe it, it might not be worth your time, right? So that's why the human is still in the mix. We're just elevating and kind of evolving the role of the human in the mix. So you don't, while it's important to understand how to write code so that to make sure you know the basics, it may not be your day-to-day anymore, right? Your day-to-day might be prompting ChatGPT to write the code and recognizing, yep, that sounds good. Testing it, yep, good, it works, okay. But being the person that can like figure it out when things don't work right? The person who like, oh, this wasn't anticipated, like having that knowledge of kind of being like a mechanic, right? It's kind of like, right, of being able to get in there and fix it. Like you have to know enough to fix it. And if you have, like, it's like autopilot. I think this is a little bit like autopilot, right? Like you still have to know how to fly the plane, because the ship is going down if the automations fail and you don't, right? And so like that translates into layoffs, getting fired, right? Not being hired back or not being able to up level your career. And so like, and we're seeing some of these things, right? Like you really have to actually know what you're doing. And so that isn't changing, right? The most successful developers always have. But I think what's changing is some of the lower level coding jobs that might earn like in the 40 to 60K range. Like, to be honest, I don't even prepare students for those jobs, but like, I think those kind of level of coding jobs might be the ones that are being replaced because the more senior developers might have more capacity and bandwidth. But, you know, I don't know what your take on that, Keith, is.
I haven't yet seen any place in industry where people say, oh, well, we're more productive now that we have AI, so let's lay off people. I haven't even heard rumors of such a thing. I hear fear about such a thing, but I haven't heard even the slightest rumor of that actually happening. Maybe it's out there, but just to give you a sense, that I think it's largely motivated by fear. The way that layoffs and stuff happen in companies is wildly complicated. AI it's like the tiniest little influence on it compared to the broader context of like a company that is, losing 100 million per month, or well, that's probably exact 10 million per month, say. Like AI is not going to magically change that. The situation that companies like that are dealing with is that maybe they have a business model that doesn't make sense or that isn't sustainable. Maybe they've drastically overhired for some particular reason, or maybe their workforce is not very productive because maybe they don't have good management, good leadership. Maybe they don't have a good culture. There's any number of reasons, but AI is usually not the factor in any of these things. The situations where I would say it can make a difference is in helping a senior developer pivot into different programming languages more quickly. So once you know conceptually, the basics, it helps you switch things faster. Especially in like early stage startups, it helps people essentially wear more hats, do a lot more different roles in that company. And so maybe in a startup that might make a difference, but keep in mind the vast majority of startups fail very early. And so is it really changing stuff there? It probably makes things better for that person, but the chance of failure is still extremely high anyway. And so,
no, for sure. Oh my goodness. So good. So guys, if you have any questions, I want to open it up while we still have Keith with us. We do have a really great question from Japheth. How does this affect the new generations of developers or anyone that is trying to get into the IT world? I don't know, Keith, if you can maybe help us sum that up for Japheth.
Yeah, so I would look at it as something that helps you go faster, right? And so I would look at AI as a way to learn faster, as a way to learn more effectively, as a way to progress yourself and your own skill set more quickly. I would also look at it as a tool for making you more adaptable to different scenarios. So if you're faced with something where you know the concepts but not the words, right? It is great at helping you with those. So I would say it's a help in accelerating your own development, and it's a help in being adaptable to different scenarios. I would say those are the really key ones. The reason why I emphasize that is because I do actually think there's a lot of really interesting application of AI in the field of learning in general. Unfortunately, so much of the debate is on people basically like cheating on their homework assignments, but there probably is some real value in helping people learn quickly, more effectively, just improving that process. But so you have to go into it not trying to find a shortcut, right? You have to go into it saying, no, I don't want the AI to do my job for me. I want the AI to help me be better faster.
Right. Yes. So I think that's a great way to kind of summarize and pull it all together. AI is actually not the answer. Now, for other fields, perhaps, but in coding, AI is not the answer. Like, you still actually have to do the work. And to be able to do the work effectively, you have to know how to do it because AI will not work 100% of the time. And yet, you will be expected by your company that hires you to do the work 100% of the time. So you still have to know all the things. But you get this tool that's going to cut your time in half. It's going to help you speed up. It's going to help you get there faster. So you don't have to spend days and days and days going down the rabbit hole, looking up Stack Overflow articles and tutorials, right? It's going to cut your work time down for sure. But you still have to know how to do those things when it doesn't, right? When it doesn't work. So I love that. Thank you so much, Keith. That was so great. And thank you so much for joining us today. If there are any other, final questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. Okay, awesome. So good. You're welcome, JFeth. So good. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. In this, in this session, it was so good. So I think just to summarize, will AI replace the tech workforce? No, not anytime soon. And to be honest, development is still just as lucrative as ever. I know I've been hearing stories about layoffs in the Joy of Coding Academy. Our students have not been seeing it. We've had record numbers of students getting job offers this year, like more than ever. So we know that we've got the secret sauce because everybody here and there is saying how hard it is. Boo hoo hoo, they can't find a job. Not our folks, right? Like we have the formula down, and so it's just as lucrative. There's just as many jobs, and to be honest, the people that are getting in now are going to be super well placed for when the market bounces back and all of a sudden there's a ton of hiring again, because it's happened every single time. And in just the 20 short years that Keith and I have been, in this field, it's already happened twice. This is time number 3, right? It happens every time. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2. It always bounces right back and the people come right back in rip roaring with over 6 figures, right? It just happens all the time. So you now is the moment. Now is an amazing opportunity where you too can get these skills and be first in line to get these positions. You don't even have to wait. You can still get them right now. So pretty awesome. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat. Actually, I've done an extended training on this topic of, how to AI proof your tech career and what to look for to line up your dream tech career. And so I'd love for you guys to try that out. There's like a workbook and a worksheet to help you map out your whole future and make this happen for you. So it's not just a dream, it can become a reality as well. All right. So thank you so much, Keith. Coach Keith is one of our coaches in the Joy of Coding Academy and a great friend. He helps oversee our AI and machine learning and data science internship. It's very interdisciplinary of an internship. It cross-cuts a lot of things, the tie into his expertise, and we're just so grateful to have him. Thank you again, Keith. Thanks so much for sharing today.
Yeah, happy to chat at any time.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, take care. And if you ever have any questions, folks, don't hesitate to reach out and comment, and we'll see you soon. All right. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.